Good evening, guys. Welcome to this lecture series on World History 2. My name is Mark Lane. I'll be instructor for the course. So a couple things before I get into it. I know I'm coming to this a little bit late. I've had some microphone issues. I just got a new one on Wednesday, and of course trying to get it to work with my OBS and try to juggle it with all the rest of the things that I'm doing. I basically got it working about 10 minutes ago. So I'm finally getting to recording some lectures here. So in the interest of time and making sure that these things go up to you as quickly as possible, I'm going to interlace some of these videos in these lecture series with videos I have had pre-recorded from specifically last semester. So in that regard, they should be, I won't look the same in all of them. I might be referencing things in some of these pre-recorded videos that don't apply to you necessarily, but listen, it's the way to get the material up as quickly as possible so you guys can get your material done as quickly as possible. So, you should expect lectures 1, 2, and at least 3 and 4 to hit your timelines at some point during this period of time. I'm going to upload them all onto YouTube and then link those all onto Canvas. So you should be able to access those pretty easily, but I want to stress, you should be able to complete the entirety of this course without any input from yours truly. You should be able to do this no problem, but hey, I'm here to talk to you if you need to talk to me, and we'll figure this out together. Now, what I wanted to talk about today, let me just pull up my notes. Here we are. Lecture 1. We're here to talk about the Columbian Exchange. This course covers almost exactly 500 years of history, 1492 to 1992. And we will begin with the Columbian Exchange because the Columbian Exchange really represents that turning point in history. However, I want to highlight that this event, an event like this, does not happen out of nowhere. Europeans did not just sail the Atlantic based on vibes alone. They just not wake up one day and say, hey, you know what would be fun? Crossing the Atlantic for shits and giggles. No. There is a series of events that lead up to this, that lead up to meetings like this one. And so trying to understand the reasons why, as we will see later in this unit, an Atlantic system gets created is going to be critically important to understanding this class, sort of later on. Now, in order to understand how we get to this, we need to talk about the Silk Road. This massive sort of economic artery of the world, connecting the the production of China and East Asia to the markets of Western Europe. Okay? Now, you may have heard the Silk Road before. It's used a lot in pop culture and pop media. And if you've done World War I, I'm sure you're familiar with it. What I want to highlight, though, is that the Silk Road is not really just a road. It's more of a network. It's a complex system of land routes and sea routes. And what are the sort of things that are crossing the Silk Road? Well, silk, obviously, but also spices and teas and porcelains, you name it. But if you look at this map, what you'll see is the Silk Road in the east begins as a really complex area. Right? There's several starting points in modern-day Korea, modern-day China, modern-day Southeast Asia, and Indonesia. But the closer it gets to Europe, you can see this on this map, the more it starts to simplify, the more it starts to converge, until after all of these various starting points all over Asia, the Silk Road ends in one of just 2 cities. 2 Italian cities, nestled in the armpits of Europe, right there on either side of the boot. To the west, the city of Genoa. And to the east, the city of Venice. These 2 cities were the gateway of the Silk Road into Europe, and it made these 2 cities fabulously wealthy, ridiculously wealthy, incredibly rich. I mean, if you look at pictures of Venice today, and you ask how it was possible for such a small city-state to afford to build such a massive city on the water, this is how they did it. And for 1,000+ years, from the time of the Romans, it was this system that fundamentally drove the global economy such that it was. If there was such a thing as a global economy from the year 300 to the year 1300, you're looking at it. This drove the economic system of the world. Now, if it wasn't obvious, you're probably sensing a but about to follow this, because sure enough, 1453, this changes. And it changes in one of the most monumental events of world history. 1453, the Great Siege of Constantinople. What you're looking at here is the last city of the Roman Empire ending, collapsing, finally, at the end of 1453, when Sultan Mehmed II of the Ottoman Empire, what is about to be the Ottoman Empire, more on that in this unit, takes the city for himself as part of his larger geographic and political ambitions. Now, usually this has traditionally been the dividing line between a World I and a World II class. Why? Well, from a World I perspective, this is the Roman Empire finally ending. No more Roman Empire. It's finished. Finally. It's no more. But from a World II perspective, I would highlight something that is in the foreground of this very famous picture. Cannons. This siege is really the first time that something new is used in a battlefield of Europe, a battlefield of the world, really. Because across that Silk Road arrives gunpowder. Up until this point, gunpowder had mainly used for decoration, what we would call fireworks today. You know, parties and parlor tricks. But it is Mehmed II and his engineers that realized the destructive potential of this. Now, these cannons are enormous. They are not designed to fire cannonballs because cannonballs do not exist yet. They are designed to fire boulders, essentially. And if you don't believe me, look at this cannon and then look at Mehmed II's horse for scale. That's how big this cannon is. The mouth of this cannon is about as tall as a horse, designed to launch gigantic stones into the great walls, the Theodosian walls of Constantinople, and break through. Now, when the Ottoman Empire expands, though, Constantinople is just the culmination of that process. It's just a culmination of that. In fact, the Ottomans will spend most of this period taking over the entirety of the Eastern Mediterranean. Now, why does this matter? Well, let's overlay the Silk Road. A Silk Road that, as it hits the European, gets narrower and narrower and narrower. By taking all of Turkey, all of Greece, all of the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, so Syria, Israel, Palestine, and then going into Egypt, taking all of the northern coastline of Egypt, the Ottomans have given themselves, I call it here a geographic embargo. Why? The Ottomans have given themselves the ability to do that. No more Silk Road. Or at least, no more Silk Road unless you play nice with the Ottomans. Unless you give the Ottomans a sizable and substantive cut of those revenues. If at all. If the Ottomans didn't like you, sorry, no more money for you. So if you're Genoa, or if you're Venice, this is an existential problem for you. Now, Venice would solve this problem by improving their relations with the Ottomans, by, making good with the Ottomans, by having strong trading relations with those Ottomans. But Genoa had put all of their eggs in the Constantinople basket. In fact, during the siege of Constantinople that I just referenced, 1453, the Genoans are the only European country that comes to help them. The only ones. The Ottomans did not forget that. Existential problem for Genoa. This is a Imagine a recession times 1,000. Imagine an environment where everybody loses their job all at once. Because it's not just the revenue that Genoa is bringing in from the Silk Road. It's all of the people whose labor was paid for by that revenue. It's the restaurants. It's the bars. It's everything. It's the labor. All of that is gone. Now what? And so immediately, there begins a quest for Asia. Europeans begin to look for a new route to East Asia, to reestablish a new Silk Road, a maritime Silk Road. And the people who take it upon themselves to find this route to East Asia are the Portuguese. An alternate route to what they would call the Indies, modern-day Indonesia. Because from Indonesia, they thought, okay, we can kind of make our way to China and beyond. However, Genoa can't do this. On this map, Genoa would be right there. You actually can kind of see Genoa on this map. It's that city that is represented under that text in the top right corner of this image. That's where Genoa is located, right in there, in that bay. Genoese sailors have spent the years, the decades, the centuries, learning how to sail the Mediterranean Sea, on a closed-off system. But the Atlantic Ocean, a very different animal. It's like learning how to drive a Ford Focus and learning how to drive a Formula One car. These things are not the same, even though technically it's still driving, right? You needed people with experience sailing the Atlantic Ocean, a hard ocean to sail, especially with the technology of the day. And the people who had the most experience doing this were the Portuguese. Because if you look at Portugal on a map, Portugal is like the westernmost European country. Their sailors have spent centuries sailing these waters. They know how to do it. And they have a general understanding of what's in that area. And so their plan is simple. To sail around West Africa using maps like the one you see here. They have a general understanding of what West Africa looks like because they've been sailing these waters before. But they fundamentally miscalculate how large Africa actually is. They think that Africa is almost like an oval. And that you sail around West Africa, and you can just sort of go straight. Go straight through on your way to China. And if you do that, you'll actually have saved time. They essentially think that anything underneath, or like Nigeria, Congo, all the way down to South Africa didn't exist. And so they start sailing. The first thing they discover while sailing are islands in the Atlantic. The Azores, Madeira, the Canary Islands, Tenerife. And then they sail a bit further. They find Cape Verde. They keep sailing along the west coast of Africa. Eventually they find Sao Tome and Fernando Po. Ever wonder why these islands speak Portuguese for the most part? As I record this, the African Cup of Nations is going on right now. And the small island nation of Cape Verde is the Cinderella story of the tournament. They're Portuguese speakers in Cape Verde. Ever wonder why? This is why. But as the Portuguese hit the Gulf of Nigeria, the Gulf of Cameroon, where they settle Fernando Po and Sao Tome, they realize that actually Africa continues for a while. Later that decade, in the 1470s, we know that Portuguese missionaries enter the Congo River because they write about it. So we know that by this period of time, okay, they have entered the Congo River. And then, eventually, the Portuguese prove their case. They reach the Cape. They reach the southern tip of Africa. They've proven that it is possible to sail around Africa on your way into the Indian Ocean. But let's think about this for a minute. We said the siege of Constantinople is in 1453. It took them 20 years to hit the Congo. And another 25, no, total, to hit the Cape of Good Hope. Think about that. If you look on a map, you'll realize that after sailing all of this way, European sailors are still only about a third of the way to their destination. They still need to sail across the Indian Ocean, and then eventually through Indonesia, Malaysia, up to hit China. This is taking too long. This is going to take too long, especially with the technology that you see here. Wooden ships, cloth sails. There is no more advanced vessels yet. Those will come later as we learn how to sail the ocean more and more and more for reasons that we're about to see. And so while the Portuguese have proven that this is possible, they have not proven it to be feasible, which are different things. So the Genoese are proverbially screwed. Now, I would highlight that I've made it seem that the trading that Genoa does is done by the government. That is the government sponsoring this trade. Wrong. It's not the government. What it is large trading families in Genoa that are sponsoring this trade with the East. And chief among them is the Colombo family. The Colombo family had made their living, their family living, on trade with the East. Specifically, transportation from Constantinople to Genoa. When this source of revenue evaporates, the family falls on really hard times, to the point that the youngest son of the Colombo family takes it upon himself to restore his family and restore his city. So he hits the books. And he starts to think about the world and think, what if there was another route to China? If it wasn't obvious who I'm talking about, the youngest son of the Colombo family's name is Cristoforo. Christopher Columbus. Plot twist. Villain origin story. So, here's Columbus's theory of the case. Theory of the case that makes sense if you explain it. Imagine the globe in your head. Now imagine, like the wedge of an orange, you pull out of that globe the wedge north-south that contains the Americas. You just pull it out. Then you take this globe with the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean and you overlap those oceans. You close the globe. In a world such as this, what's the fastest route to China? Well, Columbus says, well, wait a minute. You can just sail westward and eventually you'll hit China. You'll probably hit China a lot faster than what the Portuguese are doing, which is sailing around Africa and then across the Indian Ocean. You're sailing the long way. Of course, he can't prove this. It's just a theory. But he takes his theory and he shops it around. Remember, he can't go down to the port in his hometown to try to shop this around because the sailors in Genoa don't know how to sail the Atlantic Ocean. So he's got to go to countries that know how to sail the Atlantic Ocean. The westernmost countries of Europe. England, France, Spain, and Portugal. And he starts with Portugal. He goes to the Portuguese. And he says to the Portuguese, hey, I have this plan. I think you should follow me up. You should take me up on it. But the Portuguese say no. The Portuguese say no because they believe fundamentally that they have found a safe and secure route to China. That even if Columbus is right, that the Portuguese, bird in the hand versus two in the bush. It's a lot safer to do what the Portuguese are doing because they've proven that it works. Columbus might be right, he might be dead wrong. They're not going to give up what they've done to follow Columbus. And he shops it to Britain and France, who are in the middle of 100 Years' War, and so they're a little busy. Which leaves Spain. Now, I would have hoped that before listening to this lecture, you knew that Columbus had left from Spain. But the question nobody asks is, well, why Spain? Why does Spain say yes while the Portuguese say no? What's different here? What makes Spain unique? To understand this, you have to kind of look at Spanish history. Spain, the years up until the Columbian expedition, looks like this. Not a country yet, but rather a house divided. Spain is divvied up among a few different kingdoms. For starters, here's Portugal to the west. We're going to ignore Portugal in green, but I want to focus on the other four. To the south is the last remnants of Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, that had been pushed back and out all the way to the southernmost areas in Spain, the Emirate of Granada. To the north, there is a small mountain kingdom in what is today the Basque country of Spain, of Navarra. But the two big boys are the Kingdom of Castile and the Kingdom of Aragon, ruled over by the same family, the de Trastamara family. A family that maybe had not led the Reconquista of Spain, but had financed the Reconquista of Spain. And as a result, were enjoying the fruits of their labor by owning vast amounts of the Iberian Peninsula. Problem is, Castile and Aragon, over time, had gotten into something of a rivalry. They'd been fighting each other over petty disputes. This is one family, don't forget. And eventually, an agreement is found between Castile and Aragon to unite the two kingdoms, to put an end to this war, an end to this rivalry. Not through battle, but through marriage. The Iberian wedding, as it comes to be known, unites Castile and Aragon and forms, out of nowhere, a new country. The problem with a new country is, well, new country doesn't have any money. Right? Howard Zinn, you guys have to read Howard Zinn for this module. And Zinn writes, Spain was recently unified, one of the new modern nation states, just like France, England, and Portugal. Its population, mostly poor peasants, worked for the nobility, who were 2% of the population and owned 95% of the land. Like other states of the modern world, Spain sought gold, which was becoming the new mark of wealth, more useful than land, because it could buy anything. What the Spanish have encountered is this famous dichotomy. What's more important? Gold or land? Gold or land? Because Spain has a lot of land, but not a lot of gold, not a lot of money. Land is nice, but gold is better, what they're discovering. Because at the end of the day, if you're trying to equip a modern army, you need gold. If you're trying to hire mercenaries, you need gold. If you're trying to be a modern country, a modern economy, you need gold, and Spain didn't have it. At the end of the day, you cannot pay people in land. Trust me, the Romans tried it. It didn't work. You need gold, and Spain didn't have it. And then in walks Columbus with a get-rich-quick scheme. Spain doesn't sponsor Columbus because Spain is a rich and powerful nation with money to burn. Spain sponsors Columbus because Spain is desperate. The Columbian expedition is an act of desperation. Remember, millionaires don't buy lottery tickets. Poor people buy lottery tickets. And that's what this was. History's ultimate lottery ticket. History's ultimate moonshot. Hoping, praying that it would work. And even then, their investment in Columbus is not that big. They only give Columbus 2 ships. Third one he picks up along the way. I think in the Azores. He picks up the Santa Maria. And so he sails. And Columbus, to his luck, unintentionally discovers the Gulf Current, an ocean current connecting the coast of West Africa to the Caribbean. He didn't have to do anything. The ocean itself carried him along and eventually spat him out here. He lands in what we believe is the modern-day Bahamas. Where specifically, we don't know. We don't know specifically which island in the Bahamas, but based on his description, we're pretty confident that it was the Bahamas. Now, when he lands in the Bahamas, Columbus's first idea is that this is Indonesia. And that makes sense. Large landmass to the north, islands down to the south. Okay, based on his information, okay, he's in Indonesia somewhere. But as he starts to explore, look around, most importantly, meet native peoples, it becomes apparent that this isn't Indonesia. This is something different, somewhere different. This world is new. And in this new world, there's so much opportunity. But more importantly, in this new world, Columbus saw, on the people, on the ground, in the villages, gold was plentiful. It was everywhere. You couldn't look around without finding it. So let me remind you of Columbus's story. And let me ask you, what would you do to save your family? Would you kill? Would you steal? Would you murder? Would you enslave? How far would you go? I'm not saying this as a justification for Columbus. God, no. But I don't believe in evil, or at least comic book evil, the way the man is often portrayed. These things were done for a reason. Those motivations are there. We have to understand those motivations in order to understand what happened next. Columbus did what he did, and these are the reasons why. Okay? Now, from the Spanish perspective, what this means is that Columbus returns home not with a solution to finding China. Columbus returns home with a solution to a different problem. Spain's money problem. Now, Columbus could do a lot of things here. He could have taken his gold and gone home. Said, yeah, Spain, I didn't find China. I found a whole new world. You should go explore it. Have a great time. Bye-bye now. And leaves. He could have done that. He could have gone home, walked off into the sunset with his pile of money, and history would have probably had a much kinder opinion of him than they do. But that's not what happened. That is not what happened at all. Because Columbus offers to the King and Queen of Spain a new deal. He says, send me back, this time with resources. I've proven my concept. I've proven myself right. Send me back with an army and resources, and I will make you, Spain, the wealthiest country in Europe. And so he returns. This time with an army of not just soldiers, but a very specific kind of soldier. They come to be known as conquistadores. I call it here the conquistador system. Now, what people often don't realize is that this has been always a bit of a pun, an intentional play on words. Because the conquistadores, the conquistador, is not just a conqueror. Right? Conquistador in Spanish means conqueror. But when you remember that the Spanish word for gold means oro, other way around, is oro, well then this suddenly makes more sense. Conquista de oro. Conquistador. It's right there. It's always been right there. These soldiers are arriving in the New World not to acquire land, not to acquire territory, at least not directly anyway. They are here to acquire gold, and gold only. That's the only thing that they care about. Get rich, or die trying. Made real, made literal. But as you're about to see, conquistadores are not colonists. The conquistadores are not colonists. What do I mean by this? They don't care about the state that they leave the New World in because they have no intention of staying in the New World. Do you understand? The conquistadores. See, the difference between a conquistador and a colonist is that a colonist moves to the New World with bad intentions, but they move to the New World to set up shop in the New World. They have stakes in the New World. They're not looking to destroy it completely because they have to live there. A conquistador doesn't even have that. Let's say a conquistador and a colonist arrive at a native city. The colonist's attitude would be, cool, free city, mine now. The conquistador will say, oh, it's full of gold, let's take all the gold, burn down the city, and leave. It's a very different attitude. You have to believe me, here's Bartolomé de las Casas, a Franciscan friar sent on an expedition with a group of conquistadores to roam the countryside. And here's what he writes of his fellow explorers. The ultimate end and scope that incited the Spaniards to endeavor the extirpation and desolation of the natives was gold only, that thereby, growing opulent in a short time, that they might arrive at once at degrees and dignities that were no way consistent with their persons. These people are trying to get rich, and trying to get rich fast. That's the secret. That's what this has always been about. Acquire gold and then leave. I'll skip this one. Now there's three main stories of conquistadores that I wanted to tell you about. Cortés and his conquest of Mexico, Pizarro and his conquest of Peru, and Hernando de Soto and the conquest of Mississippi. Okay? Because these three individuals represent the highest highs of the conquistador system, if you can call it that. Remember, the highest high of the conquistador system means stripping Mexico for parts and destroying the Aztec Empire. Hernando de Soto shows just how badly this can go wrong. So, let's talk Cortés. Cortés arrives in the New World wanting to emulate Columbus. Problem is, of course, that when he gets there, Columbus has been replaced. Columbus is dead. And the new governor is not so gung-ho about exploring the way Columbus is. And basically tells a young Hernan Cortés, no, sorry, you can't go anywhere. Cortés instead endeavors on a conquest of Mexico unlawfully, illegally, without government support. I think that's very important because it just tells you that these soldiers, these conquistadores, are more like independent contractors working for the Spanish government. Not getting paid regularly by the government, they're not employees, but rather they just give the lion's share of what they get to Spain and keep some of it for themselves. This is about gold. No more, no less. And the Aztec Empire was full of it. A similar story happens with Francisco Pizarro. We talked about Cortés and his eventual destruction of Tenochtitlan. But Pizarro's discovery and eventual destruction of the Inca is very similar. Pizarro will travel down to modern-day Peru and there discover not so much gold as he does silver. Mount Potosi, the outskirts of La Paz in Bolivia, is, to this day, the largest silver mine on Earth. Now, the amount of gold that Cortés finds in Mexico is good. But what Pizarro finds is an infinite amount of silver that can just be pulled out of the ground. This makes a lot more sense if you realize Silver is what the money was made out of. Pizarro discovered a money tree in South America and used it to become one of the wealthiest men on the planet. And in this, proving Columbus right. Remember that prophecy that he gave. Send me back, and I will make Spain the wealthiest country in the world. And about 100 years later, that was true. Spain was the wealthiest country in the world. And yet, the system wasn't perfect. This is Hernando de Soto, and his story shows just how wrong the system could go, just how badly the system could go. Because here, de Soto travels to the southern United States. He travels north out of Mexico, crosses the Rio Grande, into modern-day Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, etc., etc. Do you know how much gold he finds in these territories? 0. No gold. Not even a single penny worth of gold. But why? Gold comes from mountains. Gold is mined. There is no mountains in the southern United States. There was no gold to be found. The native peoples that De Soto met had no conception of what gold was. And so when asked about it, didn't know how to tell him. They had no understanding of what this material was. And so he butchered them, thinking they were lying to him. And this shows exactly how short-sighted the system was. Not for the reasons that you think. I want to make this clear. I am not talking from the perspective of a humanitarian killing people is wrong. No. I'm talking from the perspective of ruthless and shameless capitalist Spain at the time. Why is Hernando de Soto bad for business? Think about those colonists. Those colonists arriving in the New World, wanting to set up shop. If De Soto had looked around for just 30 seconds, he would have recognized that he was in actually one of the most fertile places on the planet. A place so fertile that it would print money in the form of cash crops for centuries. But De Soto didn't realize this. Instead, it took generations for people to realize, oh my God, what have we discovered? And so when people arrive and set up what they would start to call encomiendas, the Spanish version of a plantation, they would go out and seek, let's just call it native labor, to work on these plantations, which means native labor needed to be alive. What De Soto was doing was bad for business. And so, after De Soto, conquistadores kind of go out of style. And as the next wave arrives in the New World, a wave of colonists setting up shop here, we begin to see the advent of the Columbian Exchange. An exchange of goods, of peoples, willing or otherwise, more on that later in the course, plants, animals, cultures, and diseases that resulted both directly and indirectly from Columbus's expedition. Now this might be the end of the story. Or is it? Because then something remarkable starts to happen at these encomiendas that the Spanish set up, producing agricultural goods for export. Native peoples start dying. They all start dying. Disease spreads through the encomiendas and eventually through native communities all over the continents of South and North America. And this is before we understood what germs were, so the Spanish did not understand what this was. They didn't know. And so, they had to find an alternative solution. Now, what shape that alternative solution will be, what that will look like, is a story for another class. But I want to ask a simple question. Why didn't the Europeans get sick? Why didn't the Europeans get sick? Why was it that natives were susceptible to diseases coming from Europe, but the opposite wasn't true? Spaniards arriving in the New World were not catching diseases from native peoples, getting sick and dying. It was only going one way. The Columbian Exchange is an exchange that happens in both directions, save for this one specific thing. How? Why? What? Well, the answer to that, something that I will be calling Guns, Germs, and Steel, will be explained as part of the 2 videos that I've linked with this playlist, with this series, that you should watch right after this. Okay? So I will see you for our next lecture, guys. And yeah, hope you enjoyed that. Have a good one, guys. Bye.